And then, yeah, so I am taking role. So if you are joining with a friend, so like if you guys are together, just make sure you drop in the chat that you are with like two people because I can only see names. So like if you guys are joining together, just make sure like, hey, under this person's name, it's just like all of these people. So I know that you're there and you're listening. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Lifespan development, right? You do have a quiz on this, which is why it's annoying that this one's online, but that's why I'm recording it. If you have any questions throughout the entire lecture, drop them in the chat because I won't maybe be able to hear you unmute, and if your microphone doesn't work or any of that stuff, um, that's probably going to be a problem too. You don't have to keep your camera on either. I don't know if anyone does, but yeah, you guys can just chill and listen, take notes as you see fit, and then you will have a quiz on this on probably Wednesday, but it's just like our normal quizzes that happen where they're just going to be application. So again, I'm going to start, but if you have any questions at like any point, just drop in the chat and then I'll like take a look at them. All right. So lifespan development is one of our bigger branches of psychology that we lecture on, right? So this would fall under developmental psychology. And this is just like the psychology of how we change and stay the same over time, right? So lifespan development is literally just how you change and how you remain the same over your course of your life. And everyone can see the PowerPoint too, right? Sometimes I forget to share my screen. So if you could also put that in the chat. I hate online. All right, perfect. Thanks, Sam. All right. So yeah, lifespan development is just going to study you over time, right? What changes, what stays the same. So we look at three different parts, right? So we look at physical development, cognitive development, and psychosocial development, right? So lifespan development is going to study you lifelong across three domains. Physical development should be pretty self-explanatory, right? It's like how you grow and change your body, your brain, your senses, your motor skills, and your health and wellness. So obviously we know your height and weight grows with time, right? But your motor skills also get better. So we wouldn't ask a baby to grip a pencil or expect them to color in the lines if they're doing a coloring book, right? That's something that gets better over time. Those are like skills that you have to work on, right? So like even a kid wouldn't be really good at coloring between the lines, right? But if I asked you to do that now, you'd be better at it than you were a kid. And that's because skills themselves change. All right. I have to meet someone. Who is it? Let's see. All right, we're good though. Okay, so the next one is cognitive development, right? So, cognitive development is just going to be how your cognitive skills change over time. So, this would be like how you learn, right? You learn a lot easier and better when you're older, right? Your attention is going to change. You're going to have better attention, right? Your memory is going to get better. Your language is going to get better. And your thinking and reasoning and creativity is also going to increase, right? Okay. Yeah. Oh, wait, why am I muting myself, bro? Okay. All right. Okay. So, the last one is psychosocial development, right? And psychosocial development is going to be how you change over time emotionally, right? So, emotional intelligence, how you get better at managing your own emotions, your personality is going to change over time, and your social relationships, right? That would be your psychosocial development. And that is one of the most important things, right? All of these are equally important, but your psychosocial development is especially important, right? We know that it's important because of the case study of Jeannie, which was the Pharaoh child, right? The one who grew up in complete social isolation. Um, so we know like it's really, really important, right? But when we're talking about lifespan development, sometimes like we have to figure out what normal development is, right? And that's in quotes because there's not really like a normal like development or a way that everyone develops that's the same, but there has to be like average ages where you're reaching developmental milestones. So if you don't meet them, then we know it's a problem, right? Everyone starts talking at different ages, everyone starts walking at different ages, but there is an average age that, like, hey, if they don't hit like this milestone, like they don't start talking by the time they're 1 years old, or at least like two, then we have a problem, right? Once they hit three, like we should consider neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, right? Or speech disorders or anything like that. And that's just to basically figure out something's wrong, right? So like there is no normative approach or normal like development, but we only have it because we want to make sure that kids are going to be developing properly, right? They're walking at the same time or proper time, speaking in sentences, starting puberty, right? So biological milestones like puberty are universal because that age is not going to change. But social milestones, right, are going to vary across cultures. So when we start school is completely different, right, from like anyone else around the world. How we socialize is different, right? So in America, usually we socialize in school, play dates, things like that, versus like kids around the world will go everywhere with their parents, and socialize with everyone. So social milestones are going to be completely different. Okay, so we have continuous versus discontinuous development. So there's different ways on looking at lifespan development. We're going to be focusing on discontinuous development, but continuous development is just like when you view development as a cumulative process where you're gradually improving on existing skills. So this would be like you growing each year in height, right? So it's like you slowly grow, so it's like a slow incline. So we would say this would happen with knowledge, right? You have like a certain knowledge of things and you build off of them throughout your entire life, right? So when you build off of your entire life, you slowly are like building up your skills. But we have something called discontinuous development, and this is what we're going to be basically focusing on for the rest of I think what we're going to be going over today. So discontinuous development is just like we view development as a unique stage, and every single stage, right, you have to do something to get to the next stage, right? So discontinuous development happens in stages. Each stage is going to have a specific developmental milestone or something you have to conquer before moving on to another part of a stage or moving on to a different stage. Sometimes you can get stuck in stages that can happen, and we'll talk about that too. But for now, let's talk about some discontinuous development. We're going to have some theories that we're going to talk about in a bit, but let's talk about why development can be different, right? Or why like um the way that we study it can be a little bit different, right? And it's because like development is not universal, right? Like an individual and a child, right? The way that we look at development is going to be affected by a lot of different things like genetics and the environment. And that is like a huge part, right? Genetics is going to play a huge role in development, and so is environment. So I don't know if I've ever talked about the 30 million word gap before, right? So, like, depending on a child and where they're born in a socioeconomic status household, so that means like if someone from a higher SES, right? So like someone who is well off, has money, right? Versus someone from a lower SES. So on average, a kid from a higher socioeconomic status household will know about 30 million more words than a child who comes from a low socioeconomic status household. And that is solely because of their environment. It is because of the resources, right? Who they're meeting, who they're talking to, who they're socializing with, that will increase that gap, right? So, like on average, where you are, where you're born, your like status of socioeconomic status really affects how you develop and how you grow, right? So the stage theories that we're going to talk about, they say like development is universal, and it can be in these certain parts that we're going to talk about. But when we're talking about intelligence, right, when we're talking about other things, it can vary. So, we're also going to talk about the nature nurture debate a lot in this. And it's like how much of how somebody grows is part of their biology and genetics, and how much of it is based off of their nurture. Also, if I'm going too fast, please let me know because I forget that you guys, if you are trying to take notes, I might be going too fast. So let me know if I am. But Yeah. Okay. Let me just let these people into. Okay. So nature and nurture, right? So we talked about how, again, biology can affect how you develop over time, right? That's just one portion of it, though. And then nurture is your environment, which would be exactly what we're talking about for the 30 million word gap. So the 30 million word gap, again, is just like an example of how much I guess how much your environment is going to affect how you grow. So the nature nurture debate is actually very pointless because it's always going to be both, right? No matter what, your genetics are going to play a huge role, and so is your environment, right? So your personality, your traits are going to be a result of both, right? They are going to be shaped by our environment, and our genetics are also going to shape that. So it's a very pointless debate because it's always going to be both. There's like no debate about it. But it could also answer the questions why siblings are sometimes so different, because we do share a lot of the same genetic code as our siblings. But sometimes you know that siblings can have a completely different personality, right? Completely different traits. They could be very, very different from us. So why does that happen? Right? And it's mainly because there's something probably going on in the environment that is going to be very, very, very different than maybe another sibling. Right. We're also going to talk about, are adopted children more like their biological or adopted parents? Right. So, like, that is also going to be a huge question that people have is like, if you're adopted, especially as a baby, right, are you even going to be like your biological parents? Are you going to adopt like things like based off of your adopted parents? Right. That's also a question. And is intelligence inherited, or if it's shaped by our learning experience, or if it's a combination of both? And yeah, usually it is a combination of both, right? But there are genetic portions too, intelligence, right? So these questions kind of look at like the interaction between these two. And with nature and nurture, the best way to do this is usually using studies or twin and adoption studies. So this is usually twins that are separated at birth because we can see, right, if twins are sharing the almost exact same genetic code, they get separated at birth, they have different adoptive parents, right? Will those twins be similar to each other? Or are they going to be completely different because they were raised completely different, right? So a lot of those questions get answered by those studies, which we will also talk about. So these are the theories of development that we are going to talk about, right? There's about four of them. We'll go through them pretty quickly. But basically, the first one we're gonna like go over very, very quickly. It's psychosexual theory of Freud. And we only teach it because it's like a pretty common one, but yeah, you'll see. We'll go over it pretty quickly. We're gonna spend some time on the psychosocial theory of Erikson. We're gonna go over the cognitive theory and then the theory of moral development. We'll talk about all of these and then discuss how it affects us to this day. Okay. So psychosexual theory, right, was presented by Sigmund Freud. And Freud is the person who came up with psychoanalysis, which is a huge branch of psychology that just says your childhood experiences will affect how you grow up and how it affects your relationships. And so that's a pretty big part of like repressed trauma and like your childhood and attachment styles and all of that stuff, which I don't know if you guys, I mean, I don't, we haven't talked about attachment styles yet, but we will in this lecture. But how all of those things will shape our personality and behaviors as adults, right? That it will like matter, right? So he viewed development as discontinuous and came up with these stages of development, right? So like he believed the proper nurturance and parenting, right, during a stage could lead a child to become stuck in that stage. What that means is like they cannot move on from it. right? So like his like way of looking at development was a little bit like more different too, right? We had five specific stages: their oral, anal, phallic latency, and genital, and you could see they're extremely sexual names, right? And that's like who was his entire point. He was kind of a weirdo, but um they sound sexual, but they're not. And that's basically, you just need to know the names of the stages. That's kind of all you need to know. And it was discontinuous. He was kind of the first person to like come up with a stage theory. So that's mainly like the only thing you know. The other ones we're going to get into a lot more detail, and you will need to know each stage and what they mean. But this one, this is basically it. Okay, so this is the bigger one. Psychosocial theory is the one we're going to go over. That's going to take a little bit more time to go over. So we'll go over it now. So the psychosocial theory was brought to us by Erik Erikson, right? That was his name. He was a theorist, and he emphasized the social nature of development, right? He said that the most important part of how we develop and what's going to be like the most influential is how people are going to interact with us, right? How people interact with us, how we interact with them, what we think of other people, what they think of us, right? So he argued that personality development takes place across the lifespan and not just in childhood. And we do know that's true, right? Your personality is going to be built up in your childhood, but your personality can change over your lifespan, right? You're not going to be the same way the entire time or your entire life. That's usually not possible. And it's because of the things that you go through, right? That's the whole psychosocial part of it, is your environment, the things that you go through, the people you interact with is going to change, right? All those things are going to change your personality, right? If you meet someone, if you break up with someone, if you have a best friend, if you don't have a best friend, if you make new friends, all those things are going to affect your personality, right? So your personality does and will change over time. So he based this belief on social interactions that affect our sense of self, which is our ego or identity, right? So ego just means identity. It just means your own sense of self, right? So like I know when we say ego, we think of egotistical, and that's not really what this means. It just means ego is our own identity, right? That is what we call like ourselves, like what we think of ourselves, right? Your self-esteem would be your ego or your identity. So he believed that like social interaction, especially in childhood, right? How you interacted with kids, how they interacted with you, right, affected your sense of self. If you were bullied, you had a lower sense of self, right? Like how you thought about yourself might be different from if you're popular in school. Or if your parents like socialized a lot, right? Your sense of self would be different. Maybe you'd be more confident. There's a lot of different things that affect how you think of yourself, right? So he had 8 stages, which we're going to talk about and spend some time on. But each stage, the important part about Erickson's theory is that each and every single stage in Erickson's theory, there is a psychosocial task that you have to come, like basically overcome, right? So, like in the first stage, there's a problem, they overcome it, you move on to the next stage. So that's the one like different thing about his stages, is that there's like a problem and a solution in each one. So let's talk about what they are. So we're going to spend some time on this. I would suggest not copying any of this down, like especially this, like especially this slide and only this slide, to not copy this down, because again it's like everything is listed out. There's no reason for you to like take notes on it. I would just listen. But Erickson's stages of development start with 8 different stages, and each one is going to be different and different age groups. And as you go and progress in the stages, the ages or the age bracket gets larger, right? So the first stage is going to be trust versus mistrust. And this is 0 to 1 years old, right? So trust versus mistrust is just going to be when your child, or not even your child, when a baby, right, becomes to trust or mistrust that their basic needs are going to be met, right? So this is either like they know that their parent is going to be there for them, or it's not. So we have this like common practice where it's just like, oh, if a baby's crying, let them cry. And that's a very harmful way to think sometimes because that can be true, right? Like sometimes you can and need to let a baby cry, but not when they are very, very young, 0 to 1. And it's usually like when they are crying, they need like either their diaper change, they're hungry, they just need something. And it's really important at that time you respond to those needs, right? If a parent does not respond or a caregiver, right, does not respond to the needs of a child, they'll begin to mistrust that caregiver, basically saying, like, all right, I cry and, no, nothing's happening. They don't care. I'm going to stop crying. So what happens is that crying itself is a learned behavior as a baby. You cry or they cry because they know like, hey, I think somebody's gonna come get me. But when no one does, they learn that they don't have to cry anymore because nothing's gonna happen. So they actually stop crying. So there's a lot of babies, and that's how you know there's some level of abuse going on in a household, is that if babies don't cry anymore, because they know that, like, hey, it doesn't matter if I cry or not, I'm not getting what I want. There's also a like not an experiment, but there was a phenomenon that happened in Romania after a war. It was a long time ago. And I don't even know what war it was, to be honest. But what happened was there was a lot of orphaned babies, and there was an orphanage, and all of these babies were completely orphaned, and there was obviously there was so many of them that they weren't like there wasn't enough space for them. So like these caregivers, all they could do was give them nourishment, which is just food, milk, right? So they were feeding them, right? But like that's all they could do, right? They couldn't show them affection, they couldn't pick them up. So what happened was that these babies all started dying. They started dying quick and fast, right? And they were like, what's happening? Because we're feeding these babies, they should be healthy, right? But the main thing that they were forgetting or they didn't know is that a baby needs affection to survive. You have to pick up a baby. They have to have skin contact, right? They have to have that affection, and which is why you can actually volunteer at hospitals to be a baby like cuddler. Like you could go there to hospitals, volunteer, and then you'd basically just go and pick up babies for an hour. And it's really good for the development, it's really good for their health. They need it to survive, and it's just to be held by a person or a parent, right? So, like, nourishment and feeding a child is not, especially a baby, is not enough for them to develop properly. They will die. So, the second stage, right? So, once you figure out you trust your parent or you don't, you move on to the next stage, which is autonomy versus shame or doubt. This is around 1 to 3 years old, and this is when they just develop a sense of independence in a lot of different tasks. What this looks like is like around 1 to 2 to 3 years old is when they get a little bit annoying where they want to do their own thing, right? So they'll be like, I want to do it, or I want to do it, or I want my own like pizza, I want my own thing, right? It's just like when they start to develop, like, hey, I want to do my own thing. That's that autonomy. The shame or doubt comes from when they are not able to do independent tasks, right? It's just like, oh, I couldn't do it, right? Like if they can't like if they want to put away stuff and they spill things on the ground, right? If you've seen a toddler like spill a little bit of a juice and then they pour the entire juice on the floor because they spilled a little bit, that comes from the shame or doubt, right? It's almost like a reflexive response where they feel like they have to do it, but that's why we'll see that. It's like if they drop a little bit of like Cheerios on the ground or juice and they'll just pour the rest of it. And it's like for us as adults, we're like, that's like they're throwing a tantrum or they're being disrespectful. And it's not. It's literally just a reflexive response. They really can't help it. It's almost biological. And then we have the third stage, which is initiative versus guilt. And this is when they're getting a little bit older. They're starting to have a sense of identity, right? 3 to 6 years old. They take initiative on some activities, right? That's the initiative part. They actually like initiate their own um, activities, what they like, what they want to do, and they might develop guilt when they're unsuccessful or boundaries are overstepped, right? So this is when they want to do things or they want to play or they're trying to figure out things. But if let's say a parent puts down boundaries like, hey, like we can't play like this all the time, or hey, this might be inappropriate, or hey, like this is hurting somebody else, they'll probably start crying because of the whole like guilt. They like because they don't realize what's happening, and getting yelled at by a parent is a really big deal, especially at this age. Then we have industry versus inferiority. This is 7 to 11 years, and this is when they develop the like confidence and abilities when they're like good at something versus when they're not. This is like the main elementary school. It's like, hey, I'm good at math or I'm good at English. And then like you have like a specific thing that you're good at. Or it could be even like, hey, I'm good at this sport. And if you're not good at something, you just feel like inferior because you're comparing yourself constantly to your peers. Because that is going to be the time where you're most going to be surrounded by your peers. We have identity versus confusion as our fifth stage, which is 12 to 18 years. We see the bracket getting bigger. And this is when they experiment with and develop identity and roles, right? So, like, their identity is they're trying to build their identity, they're trying to figure out who they are, and they might get confused along the way, right? So, this is like when you can't. When you don't know how to like maybe be a student and a worker at the same time, or a student and a daughter at the same time, right? It's like you don't know what your roles are and you're trying to figure it out. That's 12 to 18. Then our bracket of age gets even bigger, of 19 to 29, right? And that's intimacy versus isolation. And you either establish intimacy in relationships with others or you isolate, right? So this is when you're getting older. This is like not just physical or romantic intimacy. It's just like intimacy as in getting close to people and being vulnerable with them. So this is friendships as well, right? So like at this age is when you struggle with like having good friends or you just don't have any or you don't have good friends, right? So like you're trying to figure out your relationship with other people. Like, hey, is this person toxic? Am I able to like drop them or is it good if I like stay with them? Right? So it's more than just romantic. It's talking about just friendships in general. Then the seventh stage is generativity versus stagnation. This is 30 to 64 years old. And this is when you contribute to society and be part of a family, much bigger bracket, right? You generate like your own like contribution to society or you stagnate, which means like you're stuck, right? From 36 to 64 is when people go through like the midlife crisis or even quarter life crisis where they're just like, what am I doing with my life? Right? That would be that whole thing. And then we have integrity versus despair, which is 65 plus. And this is when like you think back to your life because they're probably thinking about death at this point or like their life, right? And it's, hey, did I live a life full of integrity or, right, do I despair like with my regrets, right? Do I have a life that meant something and I contributed better? Or, right, I just didn't do a good job and I'm despairing for my life. Like I have a lot of regrets. So this would be the psychosocial development, right? Or psychosocial stages of development. All of these different things have to do with either yourself or different people, right? Like, or different people affecting you. Like in every single one of these, there's somebody who's like has to kind of be there to make that stage. For trust versus mistrust, it's trusting a caregiver. Autonomy versus shame or doubt, doing things by yourself, but also feeling shame or doubt if like you can't and relying on other people. Initiative versus guilt, right? From like overstepping boundaries with other people. Industry versus inferiority is comparing yourself to other people, right? So each one of these has to do with like your role in your environment, with and how it affects like other people and what it has to do with other people. Okay. That is the psychosocial development theory. So if anyone has any questions, again, make sure you drop in the chat. I don't expect there to be, but yeah, okay, let's switch to the next theory, which is cognitive theory. So this is more going to focus on your thinking and your cognitive ability to do things. So we have a cognitive theorist named Piaget, and he wanted to focus on children's cognitive growth, right? So he wanted to say that, hey, there's specific stages that kids go through. Like they have to learn how to think, basically. They need certain things. So he believed that people or children develop schemata, right? Schemata is just going to be concepts that are categorized to use to interpret information. So like schemata would be specifically like, hey, kids putting things into categories and then it helps them understand the world. So, like, for example, if they have a dog or a cat at home, let's say they have a dog at home, right? They're growing up around dogs and they have a German Shepherd, right? Their schemata, how they're going to categorize and interpret information is that, hey, like my German Shepherd is a dog, right? So, like, all dogs are alike by German Shepherd. And that's obviously wrong, but they don't know that yet until they go to a dog park and they see so many different types of dogs and they adjust their schemata, right? They're like, oh, wait, there's more than one type of dog. All right, cool. And they switch, right? So, like, when children learn new information, they adjust their schemata through assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation would be incorporating new information into existing schemata. So that would be that example of, hey, there's more than one type of dog. There's not only German Shepherd, there's all these dogs that look different. That's assimilating, right? You take new information and you put it in the file cabinet of dogs. Accommodation would look a little bit differently. This would be if they saw a cat and they're like, oh, the cat's a dog because it's furry, it has a tail, it has four legs, right? It's fluffy, it's in a house. They're like, oh, a cat is basically a dog. And somebody tells them, no, that's a cat, right? Cats look a little bit different. They're so different in many ways. And then they accommodate. They change their schemata based on new information. They're like, okay, so like a dog isn't characterized by being fluffy, four-legged and having a tail, right? There's more to it than that. Because this cat has all of those things, but it's a cat, right? So they accommodate those information. They learn with time and experience. So his stages of development looked like this. He had about four stages, and we have 0 to 2 as sensory motor. And sensory motor stage was when they are going to experience life through senses and actions. This is how they make sense of the world, right? So this would be like mainly like this babies pick up things and put them in their mouth, or they like to like touch things or like smack up against it or anything like that. It's because they're using their senses to try to figure out what things are. So we have some issues that come along with each stage. So in developmental issues, so in the sensory motor stage, 0 to 2 years old, um, toddlers are going to struggle with object permanence. And that's just understanding that if even if things are not visible to you or something's out of sight, it still exists. Right. So, like, this is why they'll scream and cry a lot if their mom leaves the room because right as their mom leaves the room, they forget that she exists or they think that she's gone completely. So they will cry over that. This is one of the also reasons why people or not people, sorry, babies like the game Peekaboo so much because when you put your face behind your hands, if they can't see you, obviously we know like, hey, if you're putting your hands in front of your face, you're behind it, right? For us, like that's almost like duh, right? But for a baby, they're like, oh, like if something's blocking their face, like, oh, that person's gone completely. They don't realize that, like, hey, they're just gone for a second. They're behind their hands. So when like you're playing peekaboo and you cover your face and then you uncover it, it's like for them, it's like you're literally popping out of midair. So like that's why they love it so much. And they'll laugh and stuff like that. We also have stranger anxiety, which is supposed to be a good thing. It says a developmental issue, but stranger anxiety is a good thing, right? Like we want kids to have like be a little bit weary of strangers. The next stage is ages 2 to 6. And this is when they use words and images to represent things, but they lack logical reasoning because you can't really explain like logic to a 2 to 6 year old, right? You wouldn't be like, hey, you can't have this marshmallow now because you're gonna eat in 10 or like eat dinner in 10 minutes. They'll probably like cry, right? They don't understand. It's called pre-operational, and their developmental issues are like pretend play. So like they can't understand that they can like play different roles, play doctor, all that stuff. It does happen a little bit later. Egocentrism is another one where they're unable to take the perspective of others. So this is why like kids that are ages 2 to 6 will interact with other people based off of what they like. So like they'll offer snacks that they eat because they think that everyone likes those, right? So that would be that egocentrism. And there's also like the issue of language development because they're learning language at this point. Then we have the fourth or third stage of concrete operational, which is understanding concrete events and analogies logically, and then performing arithmetic operations, which is just math, right? That's when they like. kind of like learn that math is a thing. They struggle with conversation, but they can keep it up. Then we have formal operational, which is 12 plus, which is the description is you are going to have formal operations, abstract reasoning, right? You'll have abstract logic. You'll struggle with moral reasoning, but that's something that gets better over time. So these are PhD stages of cognitive development. They all have to do with how you think, right? How you think and how you think of other people and how language is affecting things, how logic and the way you think also affects things. So that's Piaget. The last theory is the theory of moral development, right? So the theory of moral development is going to be about moral development. So we have three stages, and each one has, or like three levels, and each one has a different stage. So there's two each, so there's six stages with three levels. So it's learning, moral development is learning right from wrong, right? Each one of us has a different moral compass, right? So first level is pre-conventional morality, then we have conventional morality, and then we have post-conventional morality. So pre-conventional morality has two stages. Stage one is going to be obedience and punishment. It's where your behavior is driven from avoiding punishment. So this is like listening to your parents because you want to avoid like getting in trouble. Stage two is your individual interest begin, right? Your behavior is also going to be driven by self-interest and rewards. Like, hey, I want to do this. I like coloring, so I'm gonna color. Or like, like anything like that. But your main moral compass comes from not like actually knowing if something's right or wrong. It's just like, hey, I think this is right or wrong because my parents are saying so. It's based off obedience and punishment, nothing else. Then we have level two, which is conventional morality. This is stages three and four. So stages three are going to be interpersonal. Behavior is going to be driven by social approval. So this is still like you don't really know what's right and wrong. Maybe you do, but you probably know. It's just like, what is everyone else doing? Right? Am I going to bully this kid because every single person is bullying this kid? And that happens a lot. Like, where I have students say like something that they regret is bullying a kid in sorry, not college, elementary school because everyone around them was doing it. And like if they didn't, they felt like they would become the bullied kid. So their behavior is driven by social approval, right? That's going to like develop or like basically figure out what's right and wrong. Like, hey, if everyone's doing it, it can't be that wrong, right? And then stage four is authority. This is going to be behavior that's driven by obeying authority and conforming to social order. This would be like your teachers in elementary school, middle school, and high school, right? Think about how much authority they had over you, and it's because you spent most of your day there. Professors don't have the same authority over students, and nor should they, right? You guys are adults. It's a little bit different, right? You don't have to listen to your professor the same way you did when you had to listen to your teacher. You're probably much more scared of your teachers than you are your professors depending on, I guess, like who your professor is, but I don't think anyone scared me. But or I hope not. But your authority, right? There's other things that are going to be affected as well. And this is like the emphasis on like police and like uh yeah, like mainly like law officers or anything like that, right? It's going to be authority. Your authority on like if we especially tell children like, hey, like, the police are getting called on you if you don't like do this or whatever, right? Like that fear of authority is what drives behavior. It's like, oh, okay, like, our teacher's telling us to do this, so we do it. That's all it is. Level three is post-conventional morality, which is stages five. We have a social contract behavior driven by balance of social order and individual rights, right? So like we kind of know what social order is and individual rights. This is when you start thinking about other people and you're like, what's right and wrong? Like, what's actually right and wrong? Stage six is when you have universal ethics, right? But its behavior is driven by your internal moral principles. So you kind of know what's right or wrong at this point, but you come up with your own principles. Like, hey, maybe people are okay with cheating on exams, but I'm not. Right? Or, like anything like that has to do with that. It's like people have different moral compasses. What are you okay with? Right? Like it becomes like at a certain point, your moral development just becomes what you think is right and wrong. Right? Logically, you think through it. You're like, hey, if I'm hurting someone else, like I think that you know what, it's not morally correct. And moral development is very interesting because sometimes there's no more like logical answer to moral issues, right? Like the whole issue of like like the train track one where it's like, hey, would you switch like the train tracks from going to run over one person versus or it's on the way to like run over six people. Would you switch it to like only run over one person? Right? Those moral issues don't really have logical answers. They can, but people still differ on that. And it's pretty like 50-50 split. Um, because like you don't really know what the right thing to do is. Like that one might not be like, hey, who really knows, right? Everyone has different perspectives on it. But yeah, that's moral development is very, very interesting and very different. Okay. So now that we talked about I guess physical, cognitive, and or we didn't talk about physical, we talked about cognitive and psychosocial. We're gonna get into physical development, right? So we have stages of development, and it's going to be mainly physical. We're gonna talk about prenatal, infancy and childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood, and adulthood. So we're gonna talk about prenatal, right? And so prenatal is just going to be like the stages like of conception or right at conception, right? So we have the germinal stage, which is weeks 1 and 2, 1 to 2, sorry. And it's when conception begins when a sperm fertilizes an egg and it becomes a zygote. And a zygote is a one cell structure. That means a zygote is one cell. It is not a human being yet. It is just a cell. Okay, mitosis occurs, and we have the process of cell division. And the zygote continues to divide, and cells become more specialized, forming organs and body parts. And this is when a zygote goes from one cell structure to a cluster of cells. Still, just a cluster of cells. So once the zygote has 150 cells, so it's like divided multiple times to get to 150. It's going to travel down into the fallopian tube and implant itself in the lining of the uterus. So the zygote is now an embryo, right? Which is just going to be a multicellular organism. So around 6 to 8 weeks is when organs can begin to function. So we have a heartbeat, right? And we have basic structures that develop like head, chest, and abdomen, and the placenta also grows. We're starting to grow, and it's just it's an organ actually. It's an organ that grows that people who are pregnant can grow for the nourishment of the embryo or like later on a child or a baby, right? And it's just through the umbilical cord. Okay, so the last stage of prenatal development is the fetal stage, which is just like the body, baby's brain fully like develops, right? The fetus, like the embryo, it goes from a zygote to an embryo to a fetus, and the fetus reaches full term, right? So at 9 weeks, like this is what it looks like, and this is like, yeah, 9 weeks is the fetal stage begins, and that is like what people say is when because people talk about abortion a lot, and when it's morally correct, right? And if it's morally correct at all, that people like have debates about. But it's seen as like, hey, if you get an abortion up until 9 weeks before the fetal stage starts or as it begins, it should be okay because at that point there's no consciousness or anything. So that is what usually people like fight for. Anything later than that, people think is like questionable. But again, it just depends on how you see it. So at 9 weeks, we have the fetal stage beginning. 12 weeks are the sex organs like differentiate so that at this point you can tell, right, what the sex is going to be. And then we have 16 weeks where the fingers and toes develop. 20 weeks, the hearing begins so they can start to hear stuff outside. 24 weeks, their lungs begin to develop. 28 weeks, their brain grows rapidly. This is really important for us to know because when you know the brain is going to start developing better, you start eating foods. A person who's pregnant will start eating foods that are better for brain development and things like that. 32 weeks, their bones fully develop. 36 weeks, their muscles fully develop. And at 40 weeks, they are full term. So that's about 10 months, right? So 4 weeks, 4 weeks per month, 40 weeks, right? Full term, that is 10 months. It is not nine. And if you know why they say 9 months instead of 10, it's just because it sounds like less so. It's just like a sexist slash misogynistic thing. It's that 9 months seem like less than 10, even though it actually is, even though it's like 1 month less, but 10 months almost seem like an entire year. And then we'd have to start taking pregnancy and things like that more seriously. So or everyone likes to say 9 months, but it is 10 months. So we have some influences that you have to be careful with, right? So there's genetic and environmental factors that affect development in each stage. So the most important thing you need to know is teratogen, which is just an environmental agent, right? It could be biological, chemical, or physical, and it causes damage to an embryo or a fetus when it's developing. So alcohol, smoking, drugs are all, and viruses are going to be teratogens. Alcohol is going to be alcohol is going to be one of the main teratogens that are going to be avoidable, right? Because it can cause fetal alcohol syndrome. And again, you can avoid alcohol and you should avoid alcohol if you're pregnant, right? Smoking, same thing. It can cause premature birth, right? Low birth weight, stillbirths, or SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. Drugs is also a teratogen, heroin, cocaine, meth, all of those. And then radiation, viruses, right? All of those can also be a teratogen. That would be a biological one, right? Drugs and smoking and alcohol are chemical. And then we could also have physical as well. And this would just be like actual harm to the person carrying. So, fetal alcohol syndrome is it's leading preventable cause, right? So, what this basically means is like, what we're talking about is heavy consumption of alcohol during pregnancy, right? Leading cause of like specifically is we don't use because these are not my old slides. But yeah, it's just like basically like low IQ is right here for cognitive, right? So there's a lot of things that happen with fetal alcohol syndrome. It's physical and cognitive, but there's a lot of cognitive deficits to fetal alcohol syndrome, right? We have abnormal facial features for physical, but we have cognitive uh development that gets affected as well because if like the person who is pregnant is drinking alcohol throughout their pregnancy, it's going to affect how this the child that they're carrying's brain is going to be developed. So we have poor judgment, poor impulse control, higher rates of ADHD, learning issues, and lower IQ scores, right? And then we have facial structures right here. What you'll see is a low nasal bridge. This epicanthal folds are your eye folds, right? Small head, small eye openings, really short nose, flat mid face, so no cheekbones, thin upper lip, and then the most like I guess most telling is smooth philtrum, which is like on top of your lip, you have like this little groove, and for someone who has fetal alcohol syndrome, they don't have that. And then they have an underdeveloped jaw. So that is like one of the main things why teratogens and things like that are going to be affected, or affecting like children. So you like staying away from alcohol is really important. So, at birth, right, we have something called newborn reflexes, and these are going to be things that help them survive. And this is just going to be like inborn automatic process to particular forms of stimulation, right? So the rooting reflex is the baby's going to turn its head towards something that touches its cheek. The sucking reflex is like when you like place something in their mouths, they'll suck on them, right? That's going to help them feed. And then they'll have a grasping reflex, which is they'll cling to objects placed in the hand. So they'll like cling to their mother. And this is why, like, if you've ever been around a baby and you put your finger in their hands and they'll grip it really tight, it's not because they like you, it's literally just a reflex. And it's actually funny to see this reflex because that grip is really tight. They can hang babies from like monkey bars and they won't let go because like it's an actual reflex. They like will not like loosen their grip. Then they have the Moro reflex, and this is when they like put out their arms if they feel like they're falling, which everyone has. This one like doesn't exactly go away. Um, but yeah. Okay, so sensory abilities are not going to be like fully developed at birth. The vision is going to be the least developed sense. They can't really see anything. That's why a lot of baby toys are colorful, right? Colorful, bright, and like very easy to work with. They prefer human voices, specifically their mothers over strangers, so they can tell the difference. They can also distinguish their mother's smell from others. So that's why, like, if a baby is sleeping and you pass them off to somebody else and they suddenly wake up and start crying, it's because they know that they're not being held by their mother because they can smell them. So physical development in newborns, like uh the main thing that you need to know is that in your nervous system, we have something called a blooming period. And blooming is that all that means is like there's a lot of neurons and a lot of neural pathways that are being formed during infancy and toddlerhood. So you will never have as many neurons and neural pathways as you once did when you were a baby, right? So like when you're born was like the amount of neurons that you had then was way more than you have now. And that's on purpose. Your brain is literally set up to like basically understand anything. So like you have neurons and neural pathways to understand a different language, right? Like they could be Mandarin, because how many of us know Mandarin? Probably not a lot of us, maybe not any of us, right? Because there's different sounds you can hear in different languages, right? So you're accustomed and ready for like anything when you're born. But what happens over time is when you don't use certain neural pathways, it's just taking up space. So they get rid of them. And that's called pruning, right? Pruning is just like picking out and throwing away the neural connections that you don't use, right? So your brain can function more efficiently. So the size of the brain increases rapidly, right? Especially frontal lobe 3 to 6 years old. And about 55% of adult size is reached at age 2 and 90% at age 6. So it's pretty like, it's pretty quick. But basically, right, what happens is like, hey, if you're not like if you're born into a household who that's not really like speaking like a specific language, Mandarin, right? It'll get rid of all of those neural pathways that could possibly learn it, and it gets rid of it. And guess what happens later? When you hear the language later, you can't hear certain sounds because you've never heard it before, and those neural pathways were never triggered. So now you can't hear certain sounds in a specific language, right? So this is why like certain speakers or certain native speakers will have trouble with English and uh like that's why we have accents, right? Because each like language has different sound and alphabet and all of that is going to affect how they speak English. And then we have motor development, which is motor skills, our ability to move around, right? So we have fine motor skills and gross motor skills. Fine motor skills are going to be very specific, very fine movements. So this will be focusing on muscles in our fingers, toes, and eyes. And it's mainly coordination based of small actions. So gripping a pencil, right? A baby really can't do that at first. They can't play cat. You can't play catch with a baby. It's not going to be able to catch a ball, right? Those are all fine motor skills that get better over time. But they can do gross motor skills, which are gross just means bigger, larger, right? So large, like they focus on larger muscle groups that control arms and legs and involve like larger movement. So this would be like walking, running, like or holding a cup. Like it's just like kind of like bigger movements. Okay. I do usually always skip those. All right. So when we get into class on Wednesday, I'm going to pick up from psychosocial development or attachment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. That's basically all we're going to talk about for today. I did record this entire lecture, so I'm going to post it. But that's all for today. You guys are free to go. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you guys all on Wednesday.